You're watching Public Comment, Sean O'Connor's video diary vlog focusing on politics, culture, and self. It delights me to chat with you today, folks. By the way, I'm searching for the right greeting. I'm sick of greetings, ladies and gentlemen, as I often say, because it assumes everyone watching is a lady or a gentleman. Not that I'm assuming impolite society is watching here, but I do strive for as much accuracy and objectivity and as few assumptions as possible. And greetings, as I've said in videos for over a decade now, just sounds far too generic to me. I always say greetings, and what kind of greetings do I mean? Anyway, today I'll be chatting to you exclusively about women. Evidence suggests that my vlogs almost entirely fail to interest the female sex compared to men. And this troubles me. Last night before bed, I was contemplating this issue, worrying, thinking, wow, what the hell is wrong with me? How could I so unilaterally repel, virtually, an entire sex? You see, I use this application called TubeBuddy to track how many or how few people watch my YouTube vlogs. For example, TubeBuddy tells me that 60.7% of my viewers are between the ages of 25 and 34. 68.4% of my audience watches these vlogs on a desktop computer. Now, when it comes to male versus female viewership, 94% of my audience, according to TubeBuddy, is male. I find this unacceptable on my part, and this means I do need seriously to evaluate possible causes. Forgive me, therefore, if something seemingly and implicitly sexist ever came out of my mouth, for I do seek to live as a decent person. My friend from William Patterson University, Raheen Ambrose, he suggests I ask you directly, what issues are important to you? So I'm asking you directly, gals out there, lasses. I love the words lad and lass, forgive me. What issues are important to you? And I suppose another thing I'd like to know. Do you have any thoughts on why men might not prioritize these issues you care about as much as you do? In the meantime, as I'm an extremely impatient person, I wanted to start researching this issue on my own of what matters. So according to the media, I'm an extremely impatient person, so I wanted to start researching this issue of matters that women care about in 2019 to gain a better understanding. 3 particular articles struck me the most this morning. The first article is from ThoughtCo, which highlighted sexism and gender bias as a top issue on the female mind these days. In the context of this as a video diary vlog of a white, straight, heterosexual male, I do wonder what might be the most appropriate and meaningful way for me to appreciate this particular concern of sexism and gender bias. I suppose taking the time to think and talk about the issue of sexism and gender bias would be a good place to start. I actually feel quite sensitive to this issue because I lived for a time under the roof of a single mother. My mother left my father when I was 3. It would have been around 1990 then when that happened. I can remember quite well, actually, the day that we left. My mother picked me up from preschool and said, "We were moving." I said, "Is Dad coming?" And she said, "No." And strange though it may seem, I didn't appear on the surface to worry about my father not moving with us. I had not seen him so much up to that point in my life. Or if I did, I didn't have any profound memories of him, except for one, of him sticking his feet in the bathtub while my little brother and I were taking a bath. To the best of my knowledge, my father worked long days and came home late and just wasn't really a part of my early upbringing. I don't really know the full details of why the marriage between my mother and father didn't work out, but to bring the story back to the topic of sexism and gender bias, I actually, just upon thinking about this, I have to point out a few things. You see, my mother had custody over my little brother and I. Every other weekend, we saw my father, which was fine, but I have to ask, what does that signify about my father's view of fatherhood, man's role in raising children, in contrast to the woman's role? I realize my mother was likely the one bound to have custody over us anyway, but to me, the major point for consideration is the fact that, indeed, my mother took responsibility for us, for raising us. And she did so in a manner that was really quite gung-ho. But what did this mean to my father? To what extent, if at all, and how, if at all, might he have grappled with this? That's what I want to know. That's what I wonder. I never can really know. May he rest in peace. In some respects, his apparent negligence really seems without excuse. My father was a psychologist who specialized in couples counseling. To say he couldn't have wrapped his mind intellectually around a father's responsibility to his children, to the woman he had children with, as a partner in parenting, as someone with concern about this woman's well-being in the situation, quite regardless of the state of their romantic relationship. To me, that's an illogical supposition. My father, he liked to cling to how awful his father was. This is one thing he opened up to me about really quite vividly in our final years together. The story goes, and this is as I know it, as my father told me, his father had only married his mother, my grandmother, because he wanted to know he could have her, to have sex with her and make her his wife. And that once that had happened, he was bored with her and didn't have any more interest in the married life, the father's life, family life, and he went off to fight in World War II. Upon returning, he started a new family. He had a new wife, he had a daughter. And I'm told years later, when my father went to visit him at the insurance agency where he worked, when my father spoke with his father's secretary, she had said to him something to the effect of, "Oh, well, I've known your father a long time, and he's never said anything to me about having a son. This is something my father has expressed as especially traumatizing to him," which I don't doubt, but still, I just don't see it as an excuse for a lack of parental responsibility and respect for the undue burden this put on my mother, who for a time went to night school while working a job. Meanwhile, how very comfortably my father lived with his substantial income as a psychologist. I don't claim to know the economic, fiduciary details of talks and agreements or lack thereof that my mother and father may or may not have had, but I don't have any evidence that my father went out of his way to help my mother, not in any truly substantive sense, not beyond child support money, which was often late. What exactly explains my father's treatment of my mother and his sense of fatherhood, or his lacking sense of fatherhood? I wonder, was he so different from his father? I say this, I can't accept the fact that my father had an intellectual disinterest even in women, considering the fact that among his passions in life was photographing nude women and sexuality, female sexual liberation, pornography, and these kinds of things. So it almost seems when he put so much time and energy into that stuff, as if he really objectified women and viewed them mostly as sex objects, prioritizing his nudist photography and stockpile of pornography over a substantive relationship with a woman. Look, I get it. Things are never that simple, of course. Philosophical, psychological, and contextual questions need to be raised. And by that I mean there's a lot of nuanced details that would have to make up the sources of my father's view of women. I try to look at this from a Nietzschean point of view. I know that one of Nietzsche's interesting ideas is his will to power idea, his idea that people cling to that which they believe brings them so much power. A possible suggestion, I thought, maybe then, from his point of view, or this point of view, maybe my father viewed sexual indulgence as some kind of deeply empowering thing, whereas he saw husband life and fatherhood as somehow weak. It seems still, though, like that would be an oversimplification. And meanwhile, maybe I'm talking too much about him right now and not enough about my amazing mother. He had the experience of retreating from the demands of day-to-day parenting and all the stress and complexities, from the psychological to the economic to all the practical considerations, etc. And my mother did not have that experience. It just makes me think a lot about this line in a Jason Isbell song. It goes like this: all the years I took from her just by being born. What if it could have been the other way around? If my mother could have explored something in life the way my father explored certain things other than parenting and the intense economic concern that comes with being responsible for children's day-to-day lives. I mean, I'm not trying to suggest to you that we suffered from immense poverty. We weren't rich, though. Not that my father was quite rich either, but I mean, to give you a sense of the contrast here, my mother and stepfather didn't exactly hand us $50 bills and say, now get out of here. On the other hand, that is something my father did do. I'm not suggesting my mother would have wanted things another way, just to be clear. Also, I understand that for her, being a mother is something she was actually really quite interested in. But I do wonder sometimes how her life maybe could have been better if she had been treated better by my father. And I'm not therefore suggesting, by the way, again, that I wish my mother and father had stayed together. I really don't. I love my stepfather, and every way I imagine the possibilities of how my mother's life could have gone this way or that way, it always comes back to him for me. And I think he's the best thing in the world for my mother, and that he really treats her right, and he always openly speaks up about his interest in her well-being. In contrast, I just don't remember my father doing that. I don't remember him saying from time to time, "How is your mother?" Maybe he did and I just forgot, but if that's the case, clearly he never did so in a remarkable fashion that sticks with me today. Sometimes I think my father indeed was a sexist. He did fail at marriage 3 times, despite writing a book on the topic and ironically being an expert in couples counseling. And people have said at his wake to me personally that he saved their marriage. So the dynamic is complex and strange, but I'm not going to speculate about why his marriages failed exactly. Though, again, I really often wonder if my father sometimes believed that women served a purpose of sexual thrills. If he viewed that as somehow a priority over deeper relationships, more holistic relationships, and taking an interest in the concept of a woman's well-being beyond the sexual gratification he got out of his relationships with them. Not that I begrudge his interest in sexuality. Doing those kinds of things with women would obviously be unfair. That would imply certain stereotypes about both men and women, stuff I don't want to do. However, it did appear, in fact, to take a precedence, to matter at times more to my father than, say, his thoughts on the ramifications of a society where men tended to fare better than women. I don't know, did my father feel a particularly profound concern for my mother? Did he feel concerned about his negligence in the field of parenting and how that could have negatively impacted my mother, and how extraordinarily unfair that was and how harmful it was? Anyway, moving on, I did come across a second article I wanted to tell you about. It was published by the American Psychological Association, and in the introduction of this article, here's what it says. It says that, quote, "A large number of cross-sectional, longitudinal, and cohort sequential studies have provided evidence that across cohorts, samples, and measures, men tend to have higher self-esteem than women." This is another troubling finding about our society today, and I believe, in fact, that the topic of self-esteem is a really serious issue. It stretches beyond sex and gender. There's a lot of complexity to it. So I am just going to confine myself to women and self-esteem, but yeah, so looking at it from that angle, I actually want to look at the political way of things here and say, while I don't quite believe politics serves as a panacea, I do believe policies can have tremendous cultural impacts. So in light of this, I believe with the 2020 primary, Democratic primary election coming up, I believe we're actually in a very unique position to bring special attention to women's issues. 6 out of the 24 candidates for president in the Democratic primary election are women. Now, I'm very poor at math, but I do know that 6 times 4 equals 24, which means that 1/4 of the candidates, 1/4 of the candidates are women. This suggests to me that for someone to hold the opinion that all of the 6 women running are just uniquely unqualified compared to all of the men, that would have, for me, the appearance of a prevailing misogynistic or sexist impulse and grab on our politics, which doesn't settle right with me. I just see no reason why, after 2 centuries of male leadership in the executive branch, at a time when a quarter of the candidates are female, a woman should be denied the presidency at this point. I believe, in fact, there is a role for ensuring inclusiveness in things, especially when there is a disproportionate amount of people excluded from something really major in society. And I think that requires ethically a mandate to ask, how can we offer more inclusion here? So we have the means for women to become much more inclusive in American politics. We have the means for this to happen more so than ever before with this 2020 primary election coming up. This is something we ought to do. I believe this would pay major dividends in elevating the self-esteem not just of women, but all oppressed groups. I believe this would be taking a lesson from winning corporate practices in Europe. That's where I bring up the third article I wanted to bring to your attention. It's an article from The Economist back in February of 2018 about quotas in Europe. Here's just a little snippet from the article. It says this: in 2008, Norway listed companies to reserve at least 40% of their director seats for women on pain of dissolution. In the following 5 years, more than a dozen countries set similar quotas to 30% to 40%. In Belgium, France, and Italy too, firms that fail to comply can be fined, dissolved, or banned from paying existing directors. Following this notion then of a quota of ensuring inclusiveness, I believe pledging my support to a female candidate when so many women are running is a good move. So I just want to make the pledge here. I, Sean O'Connor, do make the pledge to support for the 2020 presidential election in the Democratic primary. I pledge to support a female candidate. And I want to leave it at that today, ladies and gentlemen, and want to thank you so very much for taking the time to watch my public comment vlog. And I look forward to chatting with you again tomorrow. Have a fantastic day. Bye.